Speaking of the book, this ties into it. The book is filled with all kinds of good ideas and enticing options, and they all sound really good. How do you take and pick the right path and not get distracted by all these other shiny objects that are out there? Especially because the path is laid out and you think, oh, cool. This looks really good. I'm going to do this, do what Tim Ferriss told me to do in this interview. And I'm going to do that. And then you get a week into it and you haven't, it's hard. You realize that it's hard. You realize that you don't like doing that thing. And all of a sudden you go look for the next solution and you end up jumping from solution to solution and you never get any progress because you're too busy trying to chase this shiny object. How do you resolve that?
Yeah, this is a common problem. You have, for instance, in the self-help world, you have seminar junkies. I don't really do seminars, but you have people who go to a different seminar every weekend. They get all hopped up on enthusiasm, take a lot of notes. They do nothing from Monday to Friday, and they hit another seminar. It's like a junkie getting a dope hit, but they don't put in the work. So the way that you stack the deck is by understanding behavioral modification in a few ways. And you don't have to do a lot of reading about this, but there are a few necessary ingredients. One is, if you just look at the literature, do less than you think you're capable of doing. So what does that mean? If you are 100 pounds overweight and you are starting exercise after no exercise for 20 years, do not start off with 5 days a week of an hour of running on a treadmill. The pass-fail threshold is too high. So you set it, first let's get you to the gym. That is priority number one. So make it 5 minutes of walking on a treadmill 2 or 3 times a week, let's just say. Of course, my preference would be weight training, but makes an easy example. Anything beyond that is bonus points. When I write a book like this, which is just a monster, and like you said, kind of a choose-your-own-adventure book, but 2 crappy pages a day. Best writing advice I ever got. Your quota is 2 crappy pages a day. You don't even have to use them. But if you put out 2 crappy pages a day, that is a successful day. And it takes away the performance anxiety and the procrastination. If you've never flossed, you want to floss? Front teeth. That's it. Get those pearly whites in the front done.
Actually, I got an issue with that.
Okay.
If you break out the floss and you can't floss the rest of your teeth after you get done with your front ones, you got issues. Well, get in the game and floss all your teeth, people. Come on.
So I think we got to get people there with the gingerbread trail, maybe appropriate for the flossing conversation. But so the point is, though, if you want to cement a behavior, you have to break that behavior down into a few pieces. One is just getting out the floss and starting. Then the other is finishing. There are different components to it. So if I can get someone to say 5 sessions is my general guideline, make it as easy as possible so that you cement the first 5 sessions. Flossing, do your front teeth. Generally, people are going to do more. But you start there. Do it for 5 days.
If you don't do more, call me. We're your issues.
Jocko will send a drone to your
house. I'm going to come floss the rest of your damn teeth.
With shoelaces. His boots have big shoelaces, folks. Don't let him do it. So there's that. The other piece that is very underestimated is incentives. And what I mean by that is, and actually a guest on the podcast, Derek Sivers, who's an incredible entrepreneur and sort of a philosopher programmer, made millions of dollars, donated it all to music education. He's a real character. But he said if more information were the answer, we'd all be billionaires with 6-pack abs. Mm-hmm. More information is not the answer. Generally, of course, there's good and bad information, but I'll give you a great example. And this is kind of a ridiculous one, but it proves a point, which is I have a friend named AJ Jacobs. He's a writer. And he wanted to get into better shape, but he'd never been an athlete, never really worked out, never watched his diet. But there he is. He's got 1 kid, another one on the way, and skinny Jewish guy. But he described his physique as a python that had swallowed a goat physique. So he wasn't morbidly obese, but just not looking super hot. And he knew what to do. He just wasn't doing it. So he wrote a check to the American Nazi Party for $1,000, and I believe it was his best friend, this like merciless friend, he gave this check to, and he said, if I don't lose 20 pounds by the end of next month, something like that, I want you to mail this check in, which would put his name, AJ Jacobs, known writer and Jew, on the list of contributors for the American Nazi Party. He lost the 20 fucking pounds, is the punchline. And you can use sites like Coach.me or Stick, STICKK, where you actually create an anti-charity. So if there's a nonprofit or a charity you'd rather nuke than give money to, you can actually put money into escrow. And if you don't hit your goals, and they have referees and judges and so on, that money goes to your anti-charity. And it sounds so ludicrous. You could also do something simple like a betting pool. I know people who've never lost weight, and they, let's say 5 coworkers each put in $100. And whoever changes their body composition, ideally, rather than a scale, right? But using a DEXA scan, for instance, gets the pot at the end. And it is incredible how hard people will work to not lose, A, and then B, lose money. I know 2 guys who worked at Google, both fatties at the time, and one of them has since lost more than, I want to say, 80 pounds and run a few marathons. But it started with a commitment to go to the gym together, and if anyone missed the session, they had to pay the other person $1. These are people who make $100,000 plus a year, no problem. And it worked, is the funny part. But incentives, whenever you're like, how can I change this behavior? You need incentives. So give your close friend who you know would love nothing more than to see you humiliated, pictures of your like fat ass, I'm just making this up, but like whatever, in like your tighty whities. And if you don't lose X number of pounds by Y point in time, those go on Instagram. End of story. Like, you will lose the weight, I promise you. But there need to be incentives. Humans are incentive-driven machines.
And so when now we're trying to narrow all this information, do you pick one? Do you set a certain amount of time? Like, okay, I'm going to stick with this program here. Kettlebell swings at night, right? I'm going to do 75 kettlebell swings at night. Do you say, I'm going to do this regardless of the outcome? And I think you did this with podcasts too. You said, I'm going to do 8 podcasts or 6 podcasts. I'm going to record them. Regardless if I hate it, doesn't matter. I'm committing to it. So that's sort of a way to avoid distractions on other things as well.
Definitely. So there are 2 different aspects to that. So the podcasting was a goal, but I always try to set goals where you can win even if you fail. So these are goals that have side effects that carry over. And Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, talks about this in Tools of Titans, actually. He calls it systems thinking. And in the case of podcasting, he did this with blogging. I asked myself, what can I take out of this in terms of skills and relationships, even if it bombs as a podcast? I can get better at asking questions, which means getting better at thinking. I can start to minimize my verbal tics, both of which will help me to do research for books later. And on down the list, there were maybe 10 different things that I would benefit from even if the podcast failed. So 6 was this critical mass. I tend to do things in terms of sessions 5 or 6 times. That's usually my experimental minimum. But for a period of time, let's just say behavioral modification, so kettlebell swings, or fill in the blank, some kind of dietary intervention. I'm going to start with intermittent fasting. Okay, so I'm going to fast 16 to 18 hours a day. I've done up to 10 days, but let's just say I'm starting with 16 to 18 hours a day of fasting. Then I will measure things. It's a very, I don't want to scare people off, but scientific approach. It's like you have to know what effect something is having. So you can do that subjectively, 0 to 10, how do I feel? Or you can look at things like number of reps, weights lifted. I mean, I have my mug of tea and my Get After It Jocko mug approved. Thank God. If I had an unapproved, I'd look at all these knives on the table. But this is one of my training logs right here. And I've had these training logs since I was 16. So I like to treat most of my behavioral experiments, exercise experiments, dietary experiments as a 2-week experiment. And that's the minimal effective dose that I'll use in cases like that. And I'll always do the fewest number of things possible. So let's just say you read a book like this or any other book.
I think I take the opposite approach. Unfortunately, probably bad. I'll just go as many as I can possibly get it done.
So for those of you who don't know, Jocko is a cyborg. He is a robot.
But no, I'm actually just an idiot. It's all good. Yeah.
Poorly programmed robot. But the reason, here's how I think about it. When I'm looking at goals or I'm looking at behaviors, I ask myself, all right, I'm really enthusiastic. I have this list of 40 things that I might do. Which of these, if done well, will make the others irrelevant or unnecessary? I'm looking for a lead domino. Which of these will make all of the rest irrelevant, meaning I don't need to do them, or easier? And that is how I choose the behaviors or the goals to focus on. And then once I have those, just so I can control my variables to the extent possible. So if I'm changing my diet and 6 different exercise routines and my sleep all at the same time, I may not know which is contributing to higher reps in the kettlebell swing, right? Maybe the kettlebell swing is killing me, but because I fixed my diet, I'm actually recovering properly. So you don't have to take it to that level. BJ Fogg, F-O-G-G, has done some very interesting work in this area. But I would say, honestly, you want to get good at training yourself. And this is going to sound ridiculous, and it is kind of ridiculous. Take a dog training course or train a chicken. Chickens are the most interesting because they don't respond to negative reinforcement. But maybe that's not Jocko's way. You need something you can like hit with a lash. Train a, I don't know what that would be.
What do you
a
train
Wolverine.
chickens to do?
If you train a chicken, clearly not.
I didn't even know that was actually a thing.
Well, so it is a litmus test. There's a couple, and I'm blanking on their name right now, who trained more than 1,500 species for espionage purposes at one point. And they started as marine mammal trainers. So they were training dolphins, orcas, etc. And you can't just like roll up a newspaper and bad orca and hit it on the head for a lot of reasons, but it doesn't work. So they have to use positive reinforcement. And we really get into the weeds with this, but they also use a reward marker or a bridge, which is a clicker in this case, or a whistle, to indicate when the animal is getting closer to the desired behavior. So in the case of a chicken, you could teach it to say turn counterclockwise or turn clockwise, take a certain number of steps and then come back to you to receive feed. You're only using feed. But one of the quotes that I really liked from a trainer was, "You shouldn't be allowed to have a child until you've been required to train a chicken." And there's a lot of truth to that, but it's just operant and classical conditioning. But anyway, I could really go down the rabbit hole. There's a great book called Don't Shoot the Dog about this type of training. But I digress. The point being, understanding that we're all incentive driven, I think is very important. And then trying to work on one or two things at a time, because you're only doing it for 2 weeks in the way that the mental model that I use. And then you're assessing things. And which, by the way, is why I generally recommend, if we're talking about diet, so someone who needs to lose 100 or 200 pounds, and I've had the chance to interact with a lot of these people, and they've lost that weight, I will put them on a diet that has there are 3 criteria that I use when I'm trying to, say, you design a diet for an intervention for someone. Number 1, adherence. So of 100 people I tell to do it, will I have the highest percentage of compliance possible? And you could tell people, hey, the best workout routine for losing weight is taping bowling balls to your hands and doing wind sprints up and down a stadium stair. Well, not too many people are going to stick with that. So you look at the adherence, then the effectiveness. Does it produce the desired result? And then the efficiency last, in terms of is it time economical, right? Among other things. But the point being, a lot of folks give me shit on the internet. They're like, what? Slow carb beans, that'll make your intestines explode. And I'm like, A, if your intestines explode, like, you're training yourself to be weak. You need to fix your regimen. But like, B, you could throw 1,000 people into strict paleo or strict veganism, whatever your religion happens to be, and 1 out of 1,000 are going to make it. Whereas if you use the gateway drug of, say, slow carb diet, which is more convenient, a little easier to work with, in 2 weeks, let's say someone who weighs 300 pounds and has 100 to lose, they'll probably lose between 5 and 10 pounds in the first 10 days. So treating it as a 2-week experiment, they now have the positive reinforcement and the results that will lead to A, credibility for me, where I can drive them to do more ambitious things. And step by step, that can then lead them to strict, say, paleo or whatever. But when you have to start with the good program you practice is better than the perfect program you quit. You see this in exercise all the time.
Absolutely.
People come hot out of the gate and they quit 4 days later.
Yeah. That's you really what you talked about earlier is for me is prioritize and execute, which I talk about in the book Extreme Ownership is what's the biggest impact you're going to have?